My beloved brothers and sisters who are here and those who are watching Words of the Righteous, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, this is another opportunity for us to reflect upon the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want to present to you tonight a special presentation. And more than likely, it will contain information that maybe you have never heard of before. And the intention is not to shock you, but the intention is to bring forward beneficial knowledge. As Allah said in the Quran, ittaqullah wa qulu qawlan sadida, that you should fear Allah and speak a straightforward word. And so this presentation is developed for stimulation, for motivation, that the students, the younger students who are here, the adults who are here, would be motivated to seek more knowledge and not to accept everything that is given to us. And this is so important today because we are living in what you could call an information age. One of the greatest achievements of human beings is spreading information, is being able to communicate around the planet, to gather information like we've never been able to do before. But the downside of that is that we can also be confused and misinformed at the same time all over the world. And so it's even more important for us to be seeking beneficial knowledge. This month in February has been designated by Canadian government and American government as Black History Month. And for many Muslims, it was hard for us to understand the importance of Black History Month in February, especially since February is the coldest month of the year, and that's the last thing you think of when you think of Africa. But the reality is, it was set up in such a way to reflect the death of two important people in America. One is Frederick Douglass, who was a great abolitionist, African-American freedom fighter, who we believe came from Muslim family. And secondly, Abraham Lincoln, who was the President of the United States, who emancipated the slaves in America, who stopped that system. He stopped it officially anyway, of slavery. Now, what we are recognizing with the struggle that's going on in the world is that this information, or this information, is really important for all people, especially for Muslims today. And I say that because there is not only a physical military war that is going on, but there is a mental war. There is what you could call a battle for the hearts of human beings that is happening now. And to a great extent, if you control the mind of a person, you have more control than just controlling the body. Because a person could be free or told that they're free, but their mind is still enslaved. They're still a slave. So the intention here is to liberate our minds. And the information I'm bringing to you here, it's a lot of information taken from a lot of different angles. And I'm not claiming that this is the final proof. I want to be challenged. I want to stimulate you with this information. But what I found from being a historian, that sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight. It's right in front of us. Now, the so-called founder of Black History Month in America, Carter G. Woodson, he made some very important statements. One of his statements, I believe, applies directly to Muslims and to people throughout the world. He said, if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Now try to understand this statement. If a group of people, their history is taken away, they have no history, they have no traditions, then they have no place in the minds of other human beings, and they're in danger of extermination. And I found this out when the Serbians were attacking the Bosnians. You remember the Bosnian conflict some time ago. And we found that the Serbians were not only killing soldiers, but they were killing teachers. They were bombing schools, museums. And we asked, what is the purpose of bombing a museum? And the Bosnians even made it clear to us that if you destroy the history of a people, then you destroy their memory. They have no more memory of themselves, and they're easy to be controlled. And this is a tactic that has been used and is growing by people who want to commit genocide. And there are even reports of Hindu extremists who are actually moving through Bollywood in India and rewriting textbooks to take Mughal history, Islamic history, out of Indian history. Or that if you see a Muslim, it will be a terrorist, it will be an extremist, somebody who's not part of India. Palestinian people are facing this too now, that the history of Palestine and the so-called Middle East is being rewritten, so that you would think that Palestinians are actually newcomers, and they actually are troublemakers on the land. And so this approach is one that needs to be done by students and scholars and communities for every single group. I want to focus tonight, because we are in Black History Month, same thing can be done for Palestine, for India, for other parts of the world. I want to focus on African people, and especially Muslims, to give you something of Black Muslim experience. And this is something that you probably never heard of before in the form that it's going to come. I'll give you a chance to ask questions, but we need to go right into it. To understand how serious this is. Oh, you can't hear? It's low. Okay, can you hear me in the back? Okay. Yeah, okay. So in order to understand it, you need to understand what is called Eurocentrism. And Eurocentrism is when you center yourself in Europe, where Europe becomes the base of the way you think. For instance, if you said that Lebanon is in the Middle East, what do you mean by Middle East? Middle from where? It's not middle from Lebanon or Palestine, but it's middle from Europe, from London, right? If you say China is the Far East, it's far from where? If you live in China, are you in the Far East? No, you're in the center of the world. But if your mind is centered in London, Greenwich Mean Time, if you base your world time on London, then you are centering yourself in another country. That's the reason why they say first world, third world. They say the northern countries are developed countries, and the ones in the south are developing. Like your backward country, the further south you go is the more backward people are, and the more you go north is the more civilized people are. This is brainwashing, and I want to show you how dangerous Eurocentric thinking is. European writers, for a long time, they depicted Africa as a dark, backward place. And to be honest, and I don't want you to answer with politically correct or to think in a good Muslim way. Be honest. If I said to you, sugar, what comes in your mind? Sweet. If I said ice, what comes in your mind? Cold. If I said fire, what comes in your mind? If I said Africa, what comes in your mind? Say it louder so I can hear. Darkness, what else? Backwardness. People generally answer like it's a desert and people are starving to death and they're fighting each other. And then they start talking about animals. So they say hippopotamus and rhinoceros and you know whatnot. That's generally the image of the African continent itself. And some of the great European historians like Arnold Toynbee, he said that Africa has done nothing for the onward flow of civilization. Like Africa did nothing for civilization. And he's one of their greatest historians. So, truth can be hidden in plain sight. I want to show you how. This is the African continent here. And the maps that we are using, for those who are scientists, are generally called Mercator map. The Mercator map was actually made, Africa was made smaller on the map than it actually is. There's another map, Peter's projection. Because you can take China, India, and Europe and put it inside of Africa, and you still have space. Try to understand what I'm saying. You could put the distance, the size of the Chinese continent in Africa. Next to it, India. On the bottom side, Europe, and there's still more space in Africa. It's a huge place. But the way it is projected on the map, it is as though it's smaller, right? So when you make Europe big, see how big it is on the map here? When you make it big, then in the minds of people, Europe becomes big. It's like a psychological thing. It's like they say the elephant animals, when they see people psychologically, they think we're giants. It's their eyesight, something to do with the wiring of their brain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made. So this is a psychological game that has been played. As a historian, I wanted to challenge this, and I went into Africa itself, into Egypt, into ancient Egypt. And in ancient Egypt, this is what is called Kemet. That's what they called themselves. And there is what is called Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And if you look at the map, you see Upper Egypt is in the south and Lower Egypt is in the north. Does anybody know the reason why? Because of Europe? Say it a little bit louder. See, if you're in Europe, Upper Egypt is the upper part, right? No. Why is it called Upper Egypt? Does anybody know why? It is because the river, the Nile River, flows from south north. The mountains are in Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda. That's where the mountains are. So the Nile River doesn't flow from north to south. Like when you look at a map, because our brains are wired the wrong way, you think that north is the high part and the south is the low part, right? But the reality is the south is the high part. That's why they call the north Lower Egypt. So you got to turn your mind around. And when you study the history of Egypt, you'll see that the civilization began in the south, not in the north. There was a place called Tarseti, and between 3500 BC and 3100 BC, there was a great civilization there with pyramids and all kinds of things. It's in the modern day Sudan. Sudan, southern Egypt, this area was called Tarseti. And eventually from Tarseti, the people started organizing themselves, and a great pharaoh leader came up. His name was Namer or Menes, and he united Upper and Lower Egypt. Now, this is an actual sculpturing of his face. Okay, can everybody see that face? That face is clearly an African man. So this is the reality. This is what they found amongst the ruins of the people from that time. It is clearly an African man, because the early Nubian people, the Kemetic people, were actually dark-skinned people who were coming from the south, from what is now parts of the Sudan and further down south, and then they went north. Okay? Now, okay, so that's a point. So the Pharaoh was black. We're studying black history, right? What does that prove? By the year 2650 BC, the ancient Egyptians built a pyramid called the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, 2650. And this is a huge building, and the building, I don't know if you can focus to see people in it, but the building is standing up until today. It's still there. If we have a building that's 100 years old in Canada, it becomes a national monument. There's chairs in the back, if anybody who needs chairs. It becomes a national monument if you have a 100-year-old building in Canada. This is 2650 BC that they built this. Now, I went to the Step Pyramid because I didn't want to just follow books. And when you go inside the Step Pyramid, you'll see rooms like this. And you'll see hieroglyphic writing, you see numbers, you see unbelievable things that are inside of the building, still preserved up until today. And this is the Pharaoh who they built the Step Pyramid for, named Zosa, right? And if you look closely at his face, the nose part is broken off, but you can clearly see he is an African man as well. Okay? So these are African people. Clearly, it's been agreed upon by historians, UNESCO, world history. Okay? Now, let's go something a little bit more familiar. These are the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Great Pyramid of Giza. And this is one of many pyramids, but this is the greatest one. Now, this pyramid is a huge structure. And the pyramid was made for the pharaoh name was Khufu. Okay, so he was a leader. Look at his face clearly. That's an African man, very clearly. Take off his cap and put a baseball cap on, right? And you'll think you're looking at, basketball, LeBron James, or one of them like this, these famous heroes. Look at his face. That doesn't lie. What is important about this? This is probably one of the greatest buildings ever made by human beings. Now, if you can focus your eyes, try to focus in the back. Can you see that dot here? Can you follow my pointer? See the dot right there? That is a water truck. That's a water truck. Now try to adjust your eyes to how big this building is. There's 2,300,000 blocks of granite inside of this structure. And some of them are 10 tons. They were dug out from Aswan, which is in the south, and they were carried up the Nile and put into place. The corners of the pyramid are perfect right angles. Remember what the Greeks said? That the Greeks started geometry, right? Now you're going to see about the Greeks. Perfect right angles. The sides of the pyramids face north, south, east, and west. And if you study it, you'll see all the elements of modern day physics and mathematics in this building. If you don't believe it, the size of this stone, see how big that stone is there? That person there, that's me. Okay, this is a living testimony there. That's me. Look at the size of the stone. Look at it. Like that. Look at that. How did they do this? When they put the stones in, there's no cement. There's no cement. If anybody's a builder here, we need cement to make the bricks like everything straight. No cement. They cut it perfect and put it into place. They had a university complex that really became strong around the year 2000 in a place called Karnak, which is halfway up the Nile. And this was a great university. And the ancient Greeks were not racist people. The ancient Greeks said, we got our civilization, our knowledge from the Egyptians, and they were dark-skinned people with curly hair. No problem. Now, you got to adjust your minds now. You see the temple, you see this complex, see the size of the columns? These are the Greek columns. These are the ones that the world said, ancient civilization, right? That's 700 BC. The other one was 2000 BC. BC goes backwards, right? So you gotta adjust your mind to this. Now, let's go to Britain. The pride and glory is Stonehenge. See those stones there? Compare that to the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Compare it. This is a timeline, which we don't have the details to go into, but I'll show you this timeline for those who want to follow it. Okay, because we've been brainwashed with another timeline. If you say BC, what comes in your mind? BC? You think of cavemen hitting each other with sticks. BC, 10,000 BC, they developed the civilization on the Nile. 3,500, okay? 3,200 is the unity. Here's your Great Pyramid, 2,560. Now, see the difference? The Greek civilization begins in 700 BC. That's when the Greeks organized themselves. And if you look at the difference, that's like 2,000 years after they finished the Great Pyramids. It's 2,000 years after it. You see how history has been erased and has been changed around? Now, for Muslims, this is important too, because we have a tendency to think of Egyptians, we say Pharaoh or the Pharaoh, like all the pharaohs were wicked people. No. Allah said in the Quran, He has sent prophets and messengers to every nation and every tribe. So therefore, prophets were sent here. And we have proof of this. Musa alayhi salam, his time is coming about 1,525 BC. See where Musa is? So 2,000 years before Musa alayhi salam, Moses, the pyramids were already built. Okay? And it was in his time that one of the pharaohs lost control of his mind. His name was Ramses. And he wanted to be worshipped in the place of God. And it was either Ramses, his son, or his grandson was the pharaoh in the time of Musa alayhi salam. So this is Ramses. Now Muslims tend to think all of Egyptian history is based on Ramses, not recognizing there's thousands of years of history before that. Right? And we also have actual proof of people who believed in one God. Along with the pyramids, the Egyptians had obelisk. Obelisk is this stone structure sticking up. Every country is supposed to have an obelisk to show their power in engineering and technology. What is the obelisk in Toronto? Anybody know? CN Tower. What is the obelisk in France? When you see a picture of France, what do you see first? Eiffel Tower. The Americans, they just stole the Egyptian ones and they put it in their country. So this is the obelisk, but you know what's important to understand? The biggest obelisks in the world were not in Egypt, it was in Ethiopia. This is another African nation. Now, one of the great philosophies in the ancient world named Mani, who came out of the Eastern Persian area, and he wrote and he said, around the year 300 AD, now we jump to AD now, right? Our time. There was 4 powers in the world. These are the world powers. 1 was the Romans. 2 was the Persians. 3 were the Chinese. And 4, it was Aksum, Ethiopians. So they recognized the Ethiopian country, black people living in Ethiopia, as one of the 4 great powers in the world. So the first thing you have to do is you have to change your understanding of African people. Who are African people? What is African history? Because we have a tendency to think, because of the last few hundred years, slavery and the destruction of the continent, we tend to think African people are weak people. That is not the reality. This is the obelisk. That was the largest one in the world. Now, to get into some details in this, switching into the Islamic literature, and normally, you know, we don't look for color and race in Islamic literature because all the Muslims are part of one ummah. But because of racism, we have to do this. And I want to tell you a story that happened, and this is by one of the great scholars. His name was Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi. Abdurrahman Ibn al-Jawzi, 13th century. Now, Ibn al-Jawzi, who was in the Syria area, great scholar, he said one day he came and he found a group of Ethiopian scholars. And they were standing together. And as he passed them, he found that they were complaining that people were talking against Ethiopians and people, of African people. And they were feeling really bad about this. So this Islamic scholar, who was famous for all your fiqh and your hadith, he wrote a book which is called Tanwir al-Ghabash fi Fadl. It is called Concerning the Virtues of Blacks and Abyssinians. This is Ibn al-Jawzi. And there are other texts that we can go into later. And so some of this information I'm bringing to you is taken from Ibn al-Jawzi's work in Arabic. Okay, and some of it's available, that there may be some translations today. Now, what are the points that he's bringing out in order to rearrange your thinking? Aswad, in Arabic you say aswad. For white you say abyad. And aswad, sawad, meaning blackness, you can say in Arabic al-aswadan, which means like the dates. They would call the dates and water the aswadan, because you usually take your dates and water like at Maghrib or at Fajr. You know, it's kind of dark outside al-aswadan. But the word aswad comes from the same root as sawada, which means power and mastery and lordship. That's where it comes from. So from the same root comes the word sayyid. Sayyid. And a sayyid is a master, a leader, a very generous person. Siyada in Arabic means leadership. Powerful leadership. Siyada. Okay, so in Arabic, aswad was not a word that meant somebody weak, broke down, slave. No. It actually meant somebody who was very powerful. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he was born, it was the year 570. It was called in Arabic Amul Fil. Does anybody know what that means in English? What was the year the Prophet was born? The year of the elephants. Where did the elephants come from? Toronto Zoo? Where did the elephants come from? No, not Yemen. Not Yemen. It came from Al-Habasha. And Al-Habasha is Ethiopia, it's Africa. Okay? And the Ethiopians had conquered Yemen. Yes, you're right. Abraha was living in Yemen at the time. But the Ethiopians had conquered Yemen. And their governor in Yemen was called Abraha. Okay? Remember Manny, what he said, one of the 4 powers in the world was Aksum. That is because the military, they had elephants in the military and whatnot. So, the year of the elephants, and the Ethiopian army was so powerful that the Arabs of Mecca were helpless. And they went into the mountains, and as you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened with birds, right, with baked clay, and Allah was the one who defeated the Ethiopians because it was not possible for anybody on the Arabian Peninsula to have defeated them. So therefore, black people in the time of the Prophet ﷺ were not necessarily weak people. You got to take this thing out of your mind, right? I know it's hard, but if you go back in the literature, you will see they were not actually weak people. There's actually proof to show that one of the grandparents of Umar ibn al-Khattab was Ethiopian. So it's totally different when you take the veil off of knowledge, see what actually happened. Now, in the 5th year of the prophethood, when the torture and persecution was getting really bad, the Prophet ﷺ sent his companions over into Africa. Not raiding slaves, like some of the books might try to tell you, but they went as refugees. And they went across, see Jeddah here, Mecca, they went across the Red Sea, maybe they might have come down and across, and they landed here in what is now Aksum. That's where they landed. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ said in authentic hadith, if you go to Abyssinia, it would be better for you, for in it there is a king who will not tolerate oppression. It is a land of truth. Hiya ardu sidq. Go until such time as Allah shall relieve you from your distress. It's a land of truth. That's how he was talking about Ethiopia, right? This is a different concept than some books have wrongly projected. And as you know, the emperor, he gave refuge to the Muslims. He eventually accepted Islam himself. His title was called An-Najashi. In English, you say the Negus. His name was Ashama. Ashama An-Najashi. Najashi is like Caesar, emperor, king. Actually, his language was Tigray. If anybody knows Ethiopian politics today, he was Tigray man. And they pronounce it Negash. That's how they pronounce it in the Tigray language. And the Prophet ﷺ, while they were in Medina, this is later, he lined up the Sahaba and he said that, I have information that a great man has died, Muslim. Make janazah for him, for the absent person. It's the first time Salatul Janazah lil Ghaib was made, by the Muslims, and they made it for Najashi. Okay? Now, the great hijrah was made from Mecca to Medina, right? Yathrib. But a lot of people don't realize that there were over 32 Abyssinians, Ethiopians, who migrated from Ethiopia to Medina, along with the rest of the Muhajirin who had come from Mecca. And there was like 15 of the Sahaba who died in Ethiopia. If you go to the city called Negash, it's there in Ethiopia today, there's a grave of Najashi. And there's actually a grave of Sahaba that are there. Okay? And so 32 Abyssinians were part of the early Medina community. So whenever you think of Persian person, you think of Salman, right? If you think of a Roman person, light-skinned person, you think of Suhaib. If you think of a black person, who do you think of? Bilal. And for most people, that's where it ends. Like the only African person there was Bilal. That's not the truth. And I say this with all respects to our historians, because we don't look for color. We don't look for nationality when we talk about, Sahaba, and we don't, but because of racism and tribalism, you need to understand this. So our minds will begin to change in relationship to people. These are some of the Abyssinian, Ethiopian Sahaba. And I'm going to go right through it because of time's sake. Of course, there's Bilal, there's Manhaj al-Habshi, and Abu Bakr al-Habshi, and you can go on. Now, look in the middle here, and you will see, this might be some new information for some of you. Khalid ibn Rabah. Did any of you know that Bilal had a brother? Did you know that? He had a brother. His name was Khalid. Now, do you know any of the brothers of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq? No, because we don't put it in there, right? And similarly, they didn't put that in there. But this is a shock because people think that the only black presence is Bilal. This is his brother. And those are some of the other names. Female Sahabiyat. Ayman, who was the dry nurse of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet's mother died, she gave her son to the nurse, Ayman Barakah, and she took care of him. She was eventually, freed, and he looked at her as his mother. The Prophet, whenever he would see her, he would say, Ya Ummi, or Ummah. He would call her my mother. She was Ethiopian. Sa'ira, Barakah. Now, here's another big shock for you. Look at it right here. Ghafira bint Rabah. Did you know that Bilal had a sister? You didn't know that, right? Did you learn something new tonight? You did. Bilal had a sister. Okay? And many others. Other black Sahabiyat. Zafar. If you have any books on stories of the Sahaba, then you'll see these names. Mihjan, Barira, famous Sahabiyat. Now there's proof to say that Sumayya, the first Shaheed in Islam, radiallahu anha, she was actually a black person. Sumayya. Prominent black Sahaba, males, Julaybib, Sa'd al-Aswad, Salim, Mawla Abi Hudhayfa. The Prophet ﷺ said, take the Quran from 4 people. And one of them was Salim. He was one of the best Quran readers in the time of Prophet ﷺ. He was also an African man. Try to understand this because it's knowledge, it is hidden in plain sight. Muhajah was the first Shaheed in the Battle of Badr. Mughith, Muhammad ibn Maslama, the great knight horseman of the Prophet ﷺ, a black man as well in Medina. Ubadah ibn Samit, who was one of the main ambassadors who carried the letters of the Prophet ﷺ to the kings. Ubadah was also a dark-skinned man. And what is important about this? That the Prophet ﷺ said, Khairun nas qarni, thumma ladhina yalunahum, thumma ladhina yalunahum. The best generation is my generation, and then the one that follow them, and then the ones that follow them. Okay, so this is the early period of Islam. Now, I want to open up the floor just for some feedback if anybody has any questions, any immediate questions or feedback, because the topic is going to shift slightly, but I want to see if anybody has any questions, something that wasn't understood. Floor is open for any questions anybody may have. Okay? Just put it in the back of your mind. If you don't have it, then we're going to go on further. Now, let's look at the African continent now in relationship to Islam. Northwest Africa. Okay, when you look at North Africa, you will see that the Byzantine Romans came from the north. The Sahaba defeated them, and they started to take all of the Byzantine properties right across North Africa. This is how the early spread of Islam was. Okay? And when they reached into North Africa, when they reached high in the north, they established a city. Qayrawan was developed. And the area was called Ifriqiya. Ifriqiya. And this is the first modern use of the name Africa. It actually came out of Arabic. Originally it was a Berber word, maybe possibly Greek Berber word, Ifrigo, meaning like a sunny place the Muslims Arabicized the word, and they called it Ifriqiya. And when the Europeans made the map, they chose this word to mean the whole continent. But it really means Tunisia, okay, Ifriqiya. And what they realized is that below the Sahara was huge gold mines. Some of the biggest active gold mines on earth were here. And so all you need to do is cross the Sahara Desert. Is that easy? No. But there were people called Amazigh. The Romans called them Berbers. But the Amazigh people, the original inhabitants of North Africa, they will take you across the desert. And so trade routes were set up. And this is how some of the trade routes looked. For those of you who go into African history, there's one Tripoli, Ghadames, Bilma, Kanem Bornu, another one which went from Kairouan to Tahrir, Gao, another one went from Fez, Sijil Masa, and down into now in what is called Ghana. These are the major trade routes. 401, right? It's your major highway that you would take all the way to Ottawa, right? So this time you're going all the way across the desert. And because of the gold that was, remember what we said about Africa? It's a very poor place, right? The people, they don't, Toynbee said they did nothing for history. When you get a chance, not right now, because everybody loves their Google, Google who was the richest man who ever lived. Google it. Not Gates or Bezos or the Nizam of Hyderabad. None of this. You know what comes up? Mansa Musa, a black African Muslim ruler. Pound for pound, he had more gold than anybody in history. So take poor out of your mind when you're dealing below the Sahara. They were below the Sahara Desert, right? And they became so rich that this is a European map. That's like the Tuaregs, the desert people, and that's not how he looked, but that's how the Europeans depicted him. And the gold is like a grapefruit. And he made Hajj in 1324, and he carried 72,000 people across the Sahara Desert in 1324. Could you imagine the logistics in this? We have a problem today with our Hajj groups, right? 72,000 people crossed the Sahara Desert. Every place they reached, he changed the economy of the country because they had so much gold with them. And when he reached Mecca, the Mamluks, the great warriors, gave him bodyguards. He made his Hajj. On his way back, he paid scholars, architects to build masjids, schools, everywhere they went. And he ran into a city that had been a trade city, and he revolutionized it. It was called Timbuktu. Have you ever heard of the word Timbuktu before? For the older generation, what did Timbuktu mean to you? If I said to you, oh, go to Timbuktu, yeah, go get lost, right? Timbuktu means out in space, lost. Timbuktu was the chief gold trading center. So the people were fabulously rich, like they call Shangri-La. And the scholars went there. Islamic scholars went there. And so the most important thing, two things in Timbuktu, was either gold or a book. Every single family in Timbuktu had half of the Quran. Every man, woman, and child in Timbuktu could read Arabic. And it became a great center of learning. And by the 16th century, Timbuktu, they had a university called Sankore University, 16th century, right? 1500s. 25,000 students were studying not only Islamic studies, astronomy, medicine, mathematics. Remember what Toynbee said about civilization, right? In 16th century, did you have University of London? No. Did you have Sorbonne in France? No. Did you have University of Toronto? Of course not. Canada wasn't even thought of then. Okay? This is an African country, Muslims, 100% Muslim in the city. No non-Muslim could enter the city for over 100 years. That's how serious they were, right? So the European made a joke of, said, go to Timbuktu, go get lost, because they couldn't go there, and they made a joke of it. This is Sankore Mosque, what is there today. It's still, the desert's coming in now, trade routes changed. So now, but they still have thousands of books that they had there. Now, the next section of this, I want to look at Black Muslim experience in the Americas. Now, we know, number one, that the Americas here was over 75 million people before Columbus came, right? Everybody knows this by now. There was 2,000 languages spoken by the people in the Americas. 2,000 separate languages. Okay? What do we learn in school about the indigenous native people, right? They were just very simple, ignorant people, right? So many things came out of this part of the world. Corn came from the Americas. Tomatoes came from here. Potatoes came from here. So many things that are now staple products in the rest of the world came from here. Okay? But it's wiped out of memory. Remember what Carter G. Woodson said. If you take away a people's history, then now you can exterminate them, because nobody knows about them or even cares. Muslim writers, they wrote about the journey of Muslims who went across the Atlantic. Al-Mas'udi, in 956, he wrote a book, Muruj al-Dahab. Muslims went across and came back. 999, Abu Bakr ibn Umar al-Quttiya. 11th century, Al-Idrisi, he wrote his famous book. So we have proof in our text about...
Greetings. This is Things and Times, presenting a dissertation by a student, a graduate of world history. A person who undertakes academia, education, has to be disciplined. Academic discipline is not bartering on the internet, shouting and screaming and disrespecting other people and just philosophizing one's opinion. And sources are not Google. Sources are documented scripts. But sources are not fueled by racism and racial conjecture. It would appear to me that a lot of young people are elders or adults in the US as blacks, African Americans, native blacks, because this is what they call themselves, cannot differentiate life without some kind of racial intolerance or racial premise. So my question to you all is this: are you not contented with the melanated skin that you have? Are you not contented that we are living and our predecessors died painful death for us to live? For we were, and they were, captured people, and the title given was slaves. Don't you understand that? Don't you realize that? So humility is required. And many of you are lacking humility. And you're tainting, some of you, deliberately our journey into the diaspora. Because you're polluting, again, polluting the international airways called the internet. Something should be done about you people. But you're allowed to do that. And you're not allowed. It is acceptable by those who are controlling. Because it makes us look so barbaric and silly. And people who use the term that they're historians, and the people who runs the program, runs the stream, are just as accommodatingly stupid to allow that to happen. And then the disrespect. And then want to cut the continent, divide and stipulate things about the continent, to divide people based on your ignorant religious dogma, disrespecting your families from your great-great-grandparents to your actual parents right now, to make friendship with African Americans. And the African Americans are stimulating you all. And you just demean us. So, with a little bit of your time, 40 minutes, listen this presentation, because it was just geared to you all. And that program, I'm going to name it, Q Butters program. You need to exit 3 persons off your panel, or correct their mannerisms, their attitude, and their total behavior, lacking discipline, disrespectful, and yet still your program, your stream, brother, says Pan-African. That's what you're streaming. You're saying Pan-African. It is not correct. Take those people off, or rewrite your constitution, or seek discipline of all participants, respectful discipline. They are going to hurt you in the long run. So you can speak stem all you want, which is not bad, it's excellent. But show me your company, and I'll tell you who you are. They're not good for your image, and they're not good for education, because it's education that you are standing on. They're not standing on education. They're not standing on academia. They're not standing on respect. They're not standing on nothing but nonsense. Nonsense, utter nonsense. Misuse of space and time. misuse of space and time. Day after day, day after day, hour after hour. Misuse of space and time. No respect. No discipline. And it's a Pan-African program. Really? They're destroying you. And you're going to say, if only you'd pay attention. Maybe you're getting kicks because you're working all day, you're doing your stuff. No, that's the wrong kicks. What you're supposed to be doing is having a rest. Because after all, you're a mortal human being. Have a rest. But how can you when you've got rogues that have no respect for education, no respect for what you're doing? And if I'm wrong, prove it. Not prove it to me, prove it to yourself. Analyze the last month. You've got them all there. They're programs. You've got them. Rerun them. Analyze them by yourself. And then ask yourself, what is the world seeing? Unless you don't actually care. I mean, if you don't care about the image that's being portrayed, that's a different thing. But it's going to come back and hurt you. And hurt your organization, hurt your school, hurt the energy that you have expounded so far. It's cleanup time, brother. It's cleanup time. So this is dedicated to you and all your pretenders and all your good people, you know, because you have some good people. But I can't tell you all of them because I only hear them. You should know who. But there's 3 that's frequently on your panel that they are destructive to you and to what you stand for, and they do not portray a decent, respectful image of Africans. So you might have perhaps change the name Pan-African and keep it to yourself in your school. Change the panel's name, because the panel does not represent or project a good image of Africa, African people, African culture, African respectability, African dignity, and African humility. Serious thing. So I say to you now, guidance. Yeah.